Hi, Saikit. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Rainy day here in London. Um, not something to be surprised about, I guess, since we know how UK works in general. Uh, but last week was sunny, so yeah, it's rainy day. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so first of all, hi everyone. Good morning. Still 10 minutes in until afternoon. So Young Women in Sustainable Development is based out of Australia, but we have a global reach in terms of the volunteers we have at this organization. And the main idea of having this organization is that we are giving a platform to all the young women across globe uh, to accelerate what they believe in, which is, having a holistic sustainable development, starting from all SDGs like zero hunger, water, climate, and across, along with having good partnership and goals, focusing on climate change, and also, of course, all the other aspects of the UN SDGs. So we have different segments within the organization. I am particularly working in the policy department as a director, and we are. I feel that young women need voice, and this organization is that platform which will give all these young women opportunities to um, believe in, to speak out what they believe in. And I think that holistic approach is what we're trying to also achieve by reducing gender gap in the sector. Yeah, truly. We believe that this is for all the people listening to this. This is we absolutely at One Climate Club believe that, grassroots level change is what is needed for most of the companies. Corporate, there are lots of people out there who are doing it for big corporates, but there are with so many people having their own startups these days, it's very important that we inculcate a green and sustainable aspect to their operations from a very early stage, and that is what we are here to help for. Um, yes, so I think carbon pricing is a very hot topic at the moment because many countries and nations and continents, and of course, many organizations have taken up in their day to day activities to inculcate a price on the amount of carbon emissions that they're doing. Um, in retrospect, there is no hidden value to what carbon or no hidden definition to what carbon pricing is. It's basically for every ton of carbon you emit, you pay a price. And because we cannot put that generic overarching price on it across globe, we have different segments of the geography within our globe who are trying to modify this price and put a price on carbon based on where they are based out of, how are their operations spread across the globe, and of course who all are the involving parties uh, in their operations. Yeah, that is true. When you put a price on carbon, like you said, there are two aspects to it. One, I think that is very positively going forward, of course, with loopholes, but still positively going forward, is the cap and trade system. It was first originated in the European Union under the EU ETS scheme, which is the European Union's emissions trading scheme. And I think they have set a huge example in terms of how to go forward with this kind of system. You know, when we talk about carbon tax, on the other hand, it's just a straight up price. So that is something, again, as people who across globe know how much important it is to governments that we have taxpayers from both private and public sectors. Um, and also majority of the human population, it doesn't come under the rich category. So if putting a tax on carbon for the amount of emissions they are making, that is a huge pushback we are getting, in terms of what people think. They don't want to pay another tax because they're already paying enough taxes. So I think when you look at carbon tax, um, people are like, where is all this money going then? You see that every day. Bad roads, or maybe not good public parks, not good public services for them within a city or a rural area. So then people have this question even now that I'm paying so much taxes. Where is all this going? Why don't I see the results? So, and that is for tangible things that they can see. Being carbon emissions being a very intangible thing, people are like, I'm taking my car and going out for groceries. I'm burning X amount of fuel, I'm getting carbon emissions. Do I have to pay taxes for that? Where is all this money going? So I think that is something we will come towards the when we discuss about the criticism and where is this money going segment. For emissions trading scheme, I think do you have some give some highlights in terms of what that is, and then maybe I can pile on to that. Yeah, definitely. Just to add on to that point, I would say that for the EU emissions, that is something that they started. But just for the viewers and listeners as well, there is this cap and trade system is being adopted across globe, and although the EU has started it, there are many other countries who have taken this out moderately successfully, I should say, and they should definitely go forward with this scheme because just to give an example of what Saket was explaining before, for example, if you have um, a cap of 100 tons of emissions per year, which is of course too less, but just to give an example, and you are pricing the carbon at X amount of money per ton or X dollars per ton, and if you have your total emissions for the year as 80 tons, let's say 80 tons of carbon, then of course you have a reduced or incentivized level of amount of money you have to pay for that, and you are saving 20 tons worth of credit. And if you go beyond that, let's say 120, then you have to pay extra for the 20 tons of additional emissions that you have done. So basic example of a cap and trade system is this how it works. You have a certain cap which you cannot cross. If you're less than that, good for you. If you're more than that, all that money actually goes into the scheme to the government, and which they will be using further to redirect all that fund towards clean technology initiatives. So yeah, absolutely. I think across globe there are some countries. Most of them are within the European region, and a few within the Asia. And I don't think the North Americans have expanded so far. Speaking in terms of having a cap and trade system, but some states within the United States have, for example, California have a great initiative they have taken in terms of putting a price on carbon. Yeah. That's a huge number. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's where the benefits of carbon pricing would come into picture because people are asking this question, where is all this money going? So the main concern or the main aim of having a price on carbon is that you redirect all this money that's coming out of whether it's a tax, whether it's a cap and trade system, whether it's some form of a fee that you're putting on carbon emissions, is that all this money is being redirected into green technology initiatives. And there are millions of organizations out there, I'm believing, at least that has come up in the last 1 decade. So many organizations who are trying to either focus on some SDG or the other. Some people are trying to put all the money into technology, which we absolutely need given that we are phasing out fossil fuels. Although some news lately from the UK government and some Middle East government have not been conducive to what we're trying to achieve to reach the emission reduction by 50% or so by 2050. But again, some places it's difficult to phase out. Some places we are able to phase out coal and other fossil fuel technology. But we need something to replace because population is increasing. There's more demand in terms of energy and everything else. So all this money is what we understand is being redirected to investing into either climate change mitigation and adaptation, loss and damage, some form of climate financing. I think that was also the theme under which COP27 was based out of. And I think they were, yeah, yeah, definitely. So I feel that that is one of the benefits of having carbon price, that you are trying to aim. Well, like you said, the World Bank said that it is like $40 per metric ton. That would be steep for some countries whose economy is not that great, where basic necessity is not being met for human needs, but like electricity, water, clean food, and things like that. But I think for some other countries, we still have very high price of carbon. Um, and in fact, Germany has the highest price. I'm not sure, but yeah, you can definitely go into the finding out which country has what level of carbon pricing. Some of them are even pricing carbon at $100 and $200. So that is a steep price. But if you are emitting that much amount of carbon, if it's a carbon intensive sector, people should pay for it. And that's the question. I think this is also important to everybody listening to this out there. Between now and 2050, you have to accept the fact that at some point or the other, you will end up paying price for carbon. This could be through any means. There might be a direct tax implementation by a government, or you are maybe forced to, not forced, I should say, you are maybe needing to pay carbon price through your corporate responsibility schemes or some other scheme. So I think people should be eventually ready for the fact that at some point or the other they have to pay a fee for that, which is eventually good and also not nice when the economy is not great and the world is just coming out of a pandemic, a recession. Some countries are still having high inflation rates. People are barely making the ends meet. So yes, that's something we need to look out for. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I feel that the whole fundamental concept of social cost of carbon came into picture because economists at some point or the other, I think about a decade and a half ago, they decided that climate change is a market failure. That is where we are understanding the concept of social cost of carbon. And um, because I was a common man before I moved into policy, consulting business, it's just that um, from a common man's perspective, all I care about is how much do I have to pay? Can I see the difference? Where is all this going? I'm paying it now, but the difference I might see it after 10, 20 years. I might or might not be alive till then. Um, but the other aspect of this, especially from a policy making perspective, is that you need this concept among decision makers and economists to see the social and the environmental or the governance aspect of it when we put a price on carbon. That is the only way we will be able to see uh, a clear pathway of actually implementing the price of carbon. But again, that's from a very policy making perspective. That's just to see that how much is it going to cost the government? How is my country being going to be affected by this? That aspect of, like you said, having a marginal cost, um, can only implement a marginal cost if you look through the lens of a common person who's actually paying for it. Yeah. Definitely, I think that's a very key important point you have brought up here about social cost of carbon. Yeah. Just to clarify some key points or key jargons that Saket mentioned now. Scope 1 to 3 emissions. Of course, Scope 1 is direct emissions that you get from burning fuels. Scope 2 is the electricity usage, with like the second stage or second level emissions that you can consider. And Scope 3 emissions is like he mentioned, the hardest to measure because of this complexity of the upstream and the downstream supply chain. And like you said, a very key point here, like about China being one of the biggest emitters, and it is crucial for Scope 3 emissions because many countries have their supply chain linked directly to the Chinese market. And to map Scope 3 emissions is where people would say the loophole of carbon leakage comes into picture. So basically, carbon leakage is like, for example, I have a factory set up in the UK, and here I have to pay, for example, $50 per ton, let's say. But I also realized that I can move this to some other country in maybe Europe or Asia or some other place where I would not have to pay as much for per ton of carbon. So, but I'm still correct. That's correct. So then, based on that, I can move my operations there and still be able to export or import goods. And most of the exporters manufacturing units are set up in China. So then, and other Asian countries, of course, other East Asian and Southeast Asian countries. And when that happens, the cost of carbon there is all they have to pay for, not the one they are actually set up in. So that form of carbon leakage can definitely be reduced. And I think one major segment of internal carbon pricing would be to reduce this whole or to help reduce scope 3 emissions would be internal carbon pricing. Saikit, do you have any thoughts on how we can, you know, what is your take on how carbon leakage can be tackled? Yeah, I agree on that. I think the CBAM would be a key policy that would be released and can be useful to reduce carbon leakage. I think, but most of that would be mostly conducive for manufacturing companies and other corporates. Currently, what they're doing right now is to implement an internal fee, that is the internal carbon pricing, and that is very crucial. And of many millions of companies out there in the globe, uh, I think only a handful of them are currently focused on internal carbon pricing. It's very risky, and because you are actually trying to put some form of an implicit fee or a straight up tax or some form of shadow pricing, which is key because you don't know how the market value of carbon price will change. And when you're looking at such volatile structure, it is important that companies who are actually implementing internal carbon pricing, they take in great care in terms of what price are they putting on. And usually it is suggested that whatever is the current market price, you implement $10 per ton extra on your internal carbon fee. And I think it's great that you mentioned CBAM because it's important that by 2026, all those companies who are planning to implement an internal carbon pricing, which eventually will reduce their emissions, um, because when you're paying a fee internally, you would want that most projects should be more efficient, have good energy performance, or see how much reduce their emissions in terms of when their projects come up. So I think having an internal carbon price would be directly linked, um, and most organizations should consider that this type of fee should be aligned, especially after 2024. If you are bringing up a new project in your company, or in your nation, and you want to make sure that the carbon price you put internally aligns with the CBAM, because if you're exporting or importing, that CBAM price should not there should not be a huge difference between the CBAM price and then what your internal carbon price, because then you would go into loss. Because then that would be like another pandemic being hit on your company, on your revenues of your business. So yeah, I think it's great that, and I feel that CBAM is very important, because at some point or the other, like I said, you have to end up paying price um, in the next 30 years at some point. So especially for huge organizations and multi-level corporate companies, that's like a huge point for them. I think that would where the criticism would come into picture. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Because when you have CBAM in place, that means you are eventually, right now, you are only paying price for where you are placed out of, a little bit price on the export and the imports. But when CBAM comes into picture, you are actually paying for all the scope 3 emissions you are responsible for. So before that hits you too hard, it's important that you start with internal carbon pricing, one project at a time. I know that, and as somebody who's working on it currently with some of the at where I am currently, I understand that it's a very risky business, because, like you said, it's if you are trying to include that in your future investment decisions, in your revenue models, and when you at the end of the day, when you look at that balance sheet, you don't want to see a negative NPV. So just to, or at least a break even for some projects, because you are including the ESG aspect to it. And then when you do that, eventually you will understand what kind of pricing works, and for different projects different pricing works. Just like we cannot put a blanket type price across the globe based on economies and developing and developed countries. Similarly, even within an organization, I feel that for different segments of the company, for different projects, you would have to have a very curated carbon price that has to be put, because every outcome of every project would be different you know Yeah, no, I agree with that, because, and I know this is a little bit hard truth coming from our end at this point, because Like I said, we are coming out of a pandemic. We just came out of pandemic. We hit recession, and right now, if people had to choose between two things, whether they would want to pay too much amount of money for carbon, or whether they want to meet their basic needs, I think people would choose meeting their basic needs, at least for the next 5 6 years until the economy is up and running. But it is also crucial that we scrunch the numbers a little bit and make the finances a little bit tight, so that right now, if we don't do it now, because it will be too late by then. And I think everybody at this point understands the importance of keeping that 1.5-degree target, or at least the 2-degree target. Given there's going to be more economic uprise, more economic issues that's going to come into the picture in the future, unknown pandemics, unknown epidemics, nobody knows what's going to happen. A lot more climate disasters, as we are we have seen in the last week. It's I think that's true. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, of course. Our whole hearts go out to people who have been affected by that. But there's going to be more climate disasters. That is a result of what we have been doing in the past 10 years. So if we don't take an action now, um, we need to. That is where policymakers come into picture. To be able to figure out how not to break the economy, that find that algorithm, and I think that is something we at One Climate Club is also trying to figure out. How to not break the economy so that people can live, but also not affect the climate in such a way. If not, make it worse. If not make it worse, we can at least try to um, um, keep things as it is in such a way that there is at least no more emissions or a reduction of a lot of emissions. But I think that's where a lot of criticism would come into picture. Definitely, we would need another hour if we were to go on for the criticisms. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No problem. Thank you so much for having me, Saikat. And I think this is a very critical point within the nation at the moment, that we need to talk about these things and perhaps give direction to policymakers, give direction to corporates who are trying to make this carbon pricing a moderate success, if not a huge success, and save what is left of our planet.